When a Hollywood legend steps onto a late-night stage, the expectation is almost automatic. Reverence, admiration, a touch of nostalgia. The audience anticipates stories of triumph, laughter shaped by decades of fame, and a mutual understanding that legends are not to be mocked lightly. But on this particular night, respect was not guaranteed. What unfolded was not a friendly exchange of jokes, but a subtle, escalating battle of words, one that tested dignity, ego, and the fragile line between humor and humiliation. The night began like any other late-night show. Its studio lights dimmed. To a warm glow, the audience buzzed with anticipation. And the house band wrapped up its jazzy intro as Jimmy Kimmel strode onto the stage, flashing his familiar grin. The mood was light, playful, and predictable. This was supposed to be comfortable television. Tonight, we have a very special guest, Jimmy announced, pausing for effect. The man who made mumbling an art form, Rocky himself, Sylvester Stallone. The crowd erupted in applause as Stallone emerged from backstage. Time had etched lines into his face, but his presence remained unmistakably commanding. He wore a tailored black blazer over a deep maroon shirt, understated yet powerful. The uniform of a man who no longer needed to prove anything. He waved, briefly acknowledging the crowd, and took his seat beside Jimmy with a polite, measured smile. "It's good to be here," Stallone said, his gravelly voice as iconic as ever. "Good to have you, Sly," Jimmy replied, leaning forward with mock enthusiasm. "I was told you'd be bringing wisdom, experience, a few unintelligible syllables, and maybe a protein shake." The audience laughed softly, uncertainly. Stallone chuckled too, but only briefly. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, the kind of micro-expression that seasoned performers recognize as a warning. "Well," Stallone said calmly, "I left the protein shake backstage. Didn't want to outshine your green juice?" Jimmy smirked. "Touché, the exchange could have ended there?" A playful jab, a clever comeback. But Jimmy pressed on. "So let's talk about your new movie," he said. "Another action flick. Or did you finally decide to make something with, plot?" Stallone kept his expression neutral, but his posture shifted. "It's a story about redemption," he replied evenly. "A veteran confronting the ghosts of his past. It speaks to real-world pain." "Wow," Jimmy said, widening his eyes theatrically. "Deep. And here I thought it was just another excuse to flex those biceps on screen." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, thinner this time. Stallone didn't laugh. "Sometimes pain needs muscle," he said quietly, "not to show off but to carry the weight." The temperature in the studio dropped. The band stayed silent. Jimmy tilted his head, amused but cautious. "That's poetic," he said. "Did Rambo teach you that? Or was it Rocky?" Stallone leaned back in his chair, his voice steady but firm. "Funny," he said. "I always thought comedy should punch up, not down." Jimmy raised his eyebrows, surprised by the directness of the jab. "Hey, just having fun," he said quickly. "Don't want to get body slammed on live TV." "Don't worry," Stallone replied. "I only hit when it's scripted." The audience sensed it now, the shift. What had begun as light banter was turning sharp, almost confrontational. Tension hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Jimmy tried to steer things back to safer ground. "All right, let's rewind. The first Rocky film. You wrote it in 3 days, right?" He paused, then added, "Did you just run out of crayons?" The laughter this time was scattered, nervous. A wave of discomfort rolled through the room. Stallone paused. The silence stretched longer than expected. "I wrote it with everything I had," he said calmly. "While sleeping in a bus terminal, while trying to sell my dog just to eat." The room went quiet. Even the camera seemed to hesitate. "So no," he continued. "Crayons weren't really the priority." Jimmy blinked, clearly caught off. Guard Stallone leaned forward now, eyes locked on the host. Jimmy," he said, voice low but unwavering, "sometimes you crack jokes, sometimes you crack dignity. Be careful which one you're breaking tonight." The words landed hard. The stage was set. The gloves were off. Everyone had tuned in expecting laughs, nostalgia, maybe a few playful digs. What they hadn't expected was a public reckoning, a live, unscripted confrontation about respect, struggle, and the cost of survival in an industry that rarely shows mercy. With each remark, Jimmy seemed to dig deeper, relying on sarcasm to regain control. And with each response, Stallone rose calmer, sharper, grounded in a lifetime of earned resilience. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, smiling as if nothing had just happened, the smile of a man trying to mask unease. "You know, Sly," he said lightly, "you should do stand-up." The audience waited, holding its breath, because by now, everyone understood this was no longer an interview. It was a fight for respect unfolding live before their eyes. "That comeback was almost intelligible," Jimmy said, flashing a grin that was meant to soften the insult but failed to hide its edge. Stallone didn't flinch, met Jimmy's eyes calmly, the way a man does when he has nothing left to prove. "And you should try sincerity sometime," he replied evenly. "It might shock your audience." The crowd reacted instantly, an audible ooh rippled through the studio. This wasn't playful banter anymore. It was live tension, raw and unfiltered. Jimmy, clearly enjoying the pushback or at least pretending to, leaned further into it. "Let's be honest," he said. "You've made more sequels than Hollywood has original ideas. Ever think about just letting it go?" Stallone crossed his legs slowly, deliberately, as if giving the question the exact amount of respect it deserved. "I keep telling stories people want to hear," he said. "Maybe that's the part that bothers you." Jimmy chuckled, but it came out thin. "Maybe it's because you keep playing the same guy with a new haircut." Stallone's gaze sharpened, his voice cutting clean and precise. "Better than being a new haircut with the same jokes." The studio erupted. Applause thundered through the room, louder and longer than anything that had come before. Jimmy smiled tightly, jaw clenched for just a moment too long. Okay, touché," he said, raising his hands. "But seriously, don't you ever worry that people only see you as a punchline now?" Stallone leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to pull the audience closer. "Only when hosts like you try to write the jokes," he said. "Let me remind you, Rocky wasn't just a film, it was hope. For people who had none." The atmosphere shifted again. This time the applause wasn't loud for entertainment, it was heartfelt. The crowd felt it. Jimmy tried to reclaim momentum. "But you're a millionaire now, right?" he asked. "Isn't it a bit rich, talking about struggle from that position?" Stallone's voice deepened. "Struggle doesn't expire with a paycheck," he said. "It leaves scars. It teaches you how to recognize when you're being used as someone else's punchline." Jimmy went quiet for a beat. "You think I'm using you?" Stallone didn't blink. "You tell me?" The studio held its breath. For the first time all night, Jimmy looked genuinely uncomfortable. Then he forced a laugh. "Well, folks, I didn't realize we booked a philosophy major tonight." Stallone smiled faintly. "Funny, I thought we booked a host." The room exploded again. Jimmy clenched his jaw. The balance had shifted, and everyone could see it. He scrambled for another angle. "So how do you respond to critics who say your career is just nostalgia now?" he asked. "That without the past, you don't have much of a present?" Stallone's tone turned colder, sharper. "Critics talk. Hey, legends work," he said. "And I don't need to relive the past. I built it." It was a pause, long, heavy, electric. Then the audience erupted into thunderous applause. This wasn't fandom. This was respect. Jimmy leaned forward, one last attempt to regain control. "Come on, Sly. Can't you take a joke?" Stallone's smile faded. "Can you take the truth?" Silence. The kind that swallows a room whole. Jimmy turned toward the camera, forcing a grin. "We'll be right back after this short break. If Stallone doesn't punch me before then." Laughter followed, but it was nervous now. Watching knew this wasn't just a break. It was a battle line, and it was far from over. When the commercials ended, the lights snapped back on. Jimmy straightened his jacket and slipped back into his polished persona. "We're back with the one and only Sylvester Stallone," he said, voice therapy graduate. "The man, the myth, the what dash is dash it dash now. 80-something action figure from the 80s. The audience laughed. Stallone didn't move. "Better to be molded in stone than made of plastic, Jimmy," he said. Calmly. Applause erupted again, louder this time. Jimmy noticed it now. The room was no longer neutral. "Well, I'll say this," Jimmy said, pretending not to feel the shift. Your fans are loyal. Almost aggressively so. Like they still think you're that scrappy underdog from Philly. I am, Stallone replied simply. I just wear better shoes now, Jimmy scoffed. But come on. Haven't we moved past the underdog thing? Isn't it time to hang up the gloves, literally and metaphorically? Stallone looked him straight in the eye. You ever tell a soldier to hang up his boots because the war makes you uncomfortable? Jimmy blinked. The air grew heavy. I don't think making Rocky IX qualifies as war, Jimmy said. It does, Stallone replied. When you're fighting cynicism, apathy, and the belief that people like me can't still inspire. The audience burst into applause again. Stallone's voice stayed steady, but it carried weight turned. Wait, Jimmy attempted another jab. So what you're saying is, it's not ego, it's duty. Stallone paused, then nodded slightly. Call it whatever helps you sleep, he said. I call it finishing the fight. The crowd rose too. Its feet. And in that moment, everyone understood this wasn't about movies or jokes or late-night television. It was about respect. Responsibility, Stallone continued, was about reminding people that you don't stop simply because the world tells you to. You stop, he said firmly, when you decide you're done. Powerful words, Jimmy nodded, then added quickly. Unable to resist, spoken like a man trying to sell a box office ticket. The smile vanished from Stallone's face. His eyes hardened, not with anger, but with resolve. You know, Jimmy, he said quietly, you keep trying to turn this into a punchline. Maybe because deep down, you're afraid someone might actually take me seriously. The crowd erupted. Applause and gasps collided as the weight of the moment hit. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, visibly rattled now, though he tried to mask. You want to know what scares me, Sly? Jimmy said, feigning calm. It's that people think your on-screen persona is who you really are. That Rocky is real. Stallone leaned forward slowly, deliberately, as if each inch closed the distance between performance and truth. Rocky is real, he said. Not just because I wrote him, but because millions of people saw themselves in him. Jimmy, something you clearly avoid looking into. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. The tension had crystallized, sharp and undeniable. And everyone in the studio knew it was reaching a breaking point. There comes a moment when even the most composed man decides enough is enough. And when Sylvester Stallone stood up, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Jimmy leaned back, trying one last deflection. So, Sly, what's next? A line of anti-aging supplements? Maybe a reality show? Keeping up with the comebacks? A few weak chuckles rippled through the audience, but hesitation lingered now. They felt it. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was something else. Stallone exhaled slowly. You know what's funny, Jimmy? He said. You sit in that chair and poke fun like it's armor. But at some point, the jokes stop being clever and start becoming noise. Jimmy shrugged. It's just TV, man, you know that. Stallone's voice dropped, steady and unmistakably serious. Maybe that's the problem. You treat everything like a punchline, even the people who come here with a story worth telling. A hush swept through the room. Jimmy laughed nervously. Don't be so sensitive, Sly. You've taken real punches. Surely you can take a few words. Stallone straightened fully now, standing tall. The movement was calm, slow, deliberate. The audience gasped. I've taken enough, he said. And I've given enough to this industry, to this audience, and to the spirit of what real storytelling is supposed to be. Jimmy stood too, scrambling to control the optics. Hey, where are you going? We're not done. Stallone turned, not to Jimmy, but to the audience. But I am. For a beat, the studio was silent. Then applause erupted, not shocked applause, not nervous applause, but something deeper. Solidarity. Respect. Jimmy tried to laugh it off. Don't worry, folks. Next week we'll have someone with a sense of humor. Stallone paused at the edge of the stage. Without turning fully around, he said, Next week, try having someone with a soul. He began to walk off, but just before disappearing behind the curtain, he turned back one final time. His eyes swept across the studio decades of battles, comebacks, failures, and quiet dignity reflected in his gaze. I've spent a lifetime building characters who fight for something, he said slowly. Maybe it's time late-night television did the same. The camera tried to follow him, but the image cut awkwardly back to Jimmy, left blinking, unsure how to recover. Backstage, a handheld camera caught Stallone walking past stunned crew members. Some clapped softly. Others nodded in silent respect. One young intern whispered, "Thank you." And then the world reacted. Twitter erupted within minutes. Hashtags like hashtag respect Stallone, hashtag late night gone wrong, and hashtag dignity over laughs began trending worldwide. Memes flooded timelines. A still image of Stallone standing tall, mid-exit circulated everywhere, captioned simply, "Strength isn't loud. It's dignified." The segment was replayed endlessly on news networks, talk shows, podcasts, and social media. Pundits dissected it frame by frame. Fans praised it. Critics debated it. Even celebrities weighed in, actors, directors, athletes, many offering admiration for a man who refused to be reduced to a joke. Sylvester Stallone hadn't just walked out of a studio. He had walked into history. What began as just another late night appearance turned into a moment of raw confrontation, one that exposed not just egos, but values. Stallone didn't storm out in anger. He walked out with dignity, and the audience both in the studio and across the globe knew. They had witnessed something real. Who was right? Who went too far? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more stories that pull back the curtain on celebrity moments the world can't stop talking about, subscribe now. This was the moment Sylvester Stallone faced more than just questions. He faced a war of words, one fought not with fists, but with wit, dignity, and restraint. What was meant to be a routine late-night appearance slowly transformed into something far more charged, exposing the fragile balance between humor and respect. The night had all the familiar elements of a standard late-night interview. The studio lights were low and warm, casting a comforting glow over the stage. The audience buzzed with anticipation, laughter rippling through the room as the house jazz band wrapped up its lively intro. Then Jimmy Kimmel stepped onto the stage, wearing his signature grin, the smile of a host who knew exactly how to command attention. "Tonight, we have a very special guest," Jimmy announced, pausing, just long enough to build suspense. The man who made mumbling an art form. Rocky himself, Sylvester Stallone. The audience erupted into applause as Stallone appeared from backstage. Despite the years, his presence was unmistakably magnetic. He didn't rush or perform for the crowd. He simply walked with quiet confidence, the kind earned through decades of survival in an unforgiving industry. Dressed in a sharp black blazer over a deep maroon shirt, he waved briefly to the audience before taking his seat beside Jimmy, offering a polite, measured smile. "It's good to be here," Stallone said, his gravelly voice instantly recognizable. "Good to have you, Sly," Jimmy replied, leaning forward casually. I was told you'd be bringing wisdom, experience, a few unintelligible syllables, and maybe a protein shake." The audience laughed politely, unsure whether the joke was affectionate or pointed. Stallone chuckled softly, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, a signal missed by some, but not by those watching closely. "Well," Stallone replied evenly, "I left the protein shake backstage. Didn't want to outshine your green juice." Jimmy smirked, touché. The exchange felt harmless enough, but the tone subtly shifted as Jimmy pressed on. "So let's talk about your new movie," he said. "Another action flick? Or did you finally decide to make something with a plot?" Stallone's expression remained neutral. "It's a story about redemption," he explained calmly. "A veteran confronting the ghosts of his past, something that speaks to real-world pain." "Deep," Jimmy said with exaggerated awe. "And here I thought it was just another reason to flex those biceps on screen." A few people in the crowd tittered. Stallone didn't laugh. "Sometimes pain needs muscle," he replied evenly. "Not to show off, but to carry the weight." The temperature in the studio dropped almost imperceptibly. Jimmy tilted his head, amused but intrigued. "Wow, that's poetic," he said. "Did Rambo teach you that door? Was it Rocky?" Stallone leaned back slightly. "Funny," he said. I always thought comedy should punch up, not down. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, surprised by the directness of the response. Hey, just having fun, he said quickly. I don't want to get body slammed on live TV. Don't worry, Stallone replied calmly. I only hit when it's scripted. Now the tension was unmistakable. The studio audience sensed it too. What had started as playful banter was shifting into something sharper, something edged. With discomfort, Jimmy tried to lighten the mood. All right, let's rewind. The first Rocky film. You wrote it in 3 days, right? He paused, then added, Did you just run out of crayons? A ripple of unease moved through the audience. The laughter this time was hesitant, unsure. Stallone paused. The silence stretched longer than expected. I wrote it with everything I had, he said calmly. While sleeping in a bus terminal. While trying to sell my dog just so I could eat, crowd went quiet, completely still. So yeah, he continued softly. Crayons weren't really the priority. Jimmy looked taken aback, his grin faltering for the first time. Stallone leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. You know, Jimmy, he said, sometimes you crack jokes, sometimes you crack dignity. The words hung in the air, and everyone in the room understood that this interview had crossed a line from entertainment into confrontation. What no one knew yet was just how far it would go. The words landed heavier than anyone expected. In that moment, the stage was set, the gloves were off, and it was clear this interview was no longer following the usual late-night script. What had begun as light banter was now a confrontation. Unfolding in real time, everyone in the studio had tuned in expecting jokes, nostalgia, and easy laughter. What they hadn't expected was a fight for respect, raw, unscripted, and impossible to ignore. With each passing remark, Jimmy Kimmel leaned further into mockery, while Sylvester Stallone rose steadily above it, refusing to be diminished. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, wearing a relaxed smile, as if nothing significant had just happened. You know, Sly, Jimmy said casually, you should do stand-up. He paused, then added with a grin that comeback was almost intelligible. Stallone didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't bristle. He simply met Jimmy's eyes and replied evenly, and you should try sincerity sometime. It might shock your audience. The crowd reacted instantly. A loud, collective ooh rippled through the studio as the tension tightened like a pulled wire. Jimmy, clearly enjoying the friction or perhaps hiding behind it, pressed further. Let's be honest, he said. You've made more sequels than Hollywood has original ideas. Ever think of just letting it go? Stallone crossed his legs slowly, deliberately, as if considering not just the question, but the intention behind it. I keep telling stories people want to hear, he said calmly. Maybe that's the part that bothers you. Jimmy chuckled sarcastically. Or maybe it's because you keep playing the same guy with a new haircut. Stallone's gaze sharpened, his voice steady but cutting. Better than being a new haircut with the same jokes. The audience roared. Applause thundered through the studio, drowning out everything else. Jimmy smiled tightly, the corners of his mouth stiff, jaw clenched just enough to betray irritation. Okay, touché, Jimmy said, raising his hands. But seriously, isn't there a part of you that worries people only see you as a punchline? Stallone leaned forward, closing the space between them. Only when hosts like you try to write the jokes, he said. Let me remind you, Rocky, it wasn't just a film. It was hope for a lot of people who had none. The atmosphere shifted again. This time the applause wasn't playful. It was deep, strong, and heartfelt. You could feel the respect in it. Jimmy tried to regain momentum. But you're a millionaire now, right? He asked. Don't you think it's a bit rich, talking about struggle? Stallone's voice deepened. Struggle doesn't expire with a paycheck, he said. It leaves scars. And it teaches you how to recognize when you're being used for someone else's punchline. Jimmy fell silent for a moment. You think I'm using you? He asked. Stallone didn't blink. You tell me. The audience held its breath. For the first time all night, Jimmy looked uncomfortable. He forced a laugh. Well, folks, I didn't realize we booked a philosophy major tonight. Stallone smiled faintly. Funny, I thought we booked a host. The studio erupted again. Applause echoed off the walls. Jimmy clenched his jaw. The dynamic had shifted and everyone could see it. He scrambled for another angle. "So how do you respond to critics who say your career is just nostalgia now?" Jimmy asked. "That without the past, you're not much in the present." Stallone's tone turned colder, sharper. "Critics talk," he said. "Legends work. And I don't need to relive the past. I built it." There was a pause, long, heavy, electric. The audience, nearly breathless, burst into thunderous applause. This wasn't just support, it was respect. Jimmy leaned forward one last time, trying to regain control. "Come on, Sly, can't you take a joke?" Stallone's smile faded. "Can you take the truth?" Silence. The kind of silence that swallows a room whole. The band didn't move. The audience didn't breathe. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Finally, Jimmy turned toward the camera, forcing a grin. "We'll be right back after this short break." "Stallone doesn't punch me before then." A few nervous laughs followed, but everyone watching knew the truth. This wasn't just a break in the show. It was a line drawn in the sand. And whatever came next, this interview had already become something no one would forget.